Welcome to Managerial Epidemiology and Decision Making in Healthcare. I am your host, Chris Bayonet, and I'm a major in health systems management. This is our new employee orientation. So, this is a component of the HGMT-307 Managerial Epidemiology class offered at the University of Maryland Global Campus. My professor is Dr. Seth Buffo, and we will be discussing a few items today. But first, I'm going to give you a little brief background on myself, and just bear with me as I do this. It's been a while since I've presented something of this caliber. So I have a healthcare background spanning about 2 decades and across different specialties. I have been an EMT and a medic in 2 states, both the state of New York and the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have worked in both the emergency and cardiac services department at a level 1 trauma center in New York State. And I have overseen operations for both allogeneic whole blood donation and plateletpheresis, as well as having overseen and taught therapeutic phlebotomy for Virginia Blood Services. So I've been in healthcare probably close to about 18 years at this point, and a wealth of knowledge to share with you all. One of my specialties, as I mentioned, has been therapeutic phlebotomy, and specifically hereditary hemochromatosis and both primary and secondary polycythemia. When I was with Virginia Blood Services, I wrote a series of training modules on the topic, and I've actually worked with over 400 patients that were being drawn regularly. So we're actually going to discuss that a little bit later in the presentation today, and I do appreciate you all listening to everything that we're going to be discussing. So first, what will we be covering today? Well, the first thing is obviously what is managerial epidemiology. The second thing is going to be who can benefit from applying managerial epidemiology, as well as where can I find data needed to perform these tasks, and when will I use what we've learned today, as well as why do we need to know this process. And so got a little ahead of myself there. I do apologize. So I have chosen a typical reporting framework to explain what we're doing, because in many ways what we're going to be doing is pretty much you're going to be investigators looking into a different topic, and you're going to help utilize these tasks throughout your careers in management. So first thing I'm going to do is overview of managerial epidemiology. What is it and how do you use it? So what is managerial epidemiology, or let's rephrase it a little bit, the epidemiology of management? You will hear some shuffling because I do have some notes in front of me, so I do apologize. So to understand what managerial epidemiology is, we need to understand the components of the words. And the reason being, to truly understand a concept, we need to understand the language which is being used to describe it. We all have an understanding of what management is and what managerial duties are, but what is managerial epidemiology? And I do apologize, that was my daughter walking behind me as I'm recording, so I'm not really able to edit that out. So first off, let's explore what is epidemiology before combining it back together. Epidemiology is defined as the study of epidemics, the science of epidemics, and it dates back to 1850s and has actually Greek origins, literally meaning among the people of or of one's own countrymen at home. So that's a mouthful. So we're going to break that down a little bit more. So what are epidemics technically? Well, epidemics are defined as an epidemic disease or a temporary prevalence of a disease throughout a community. And so, what is the community? Where does that fit in? What is that, guys? So, communities are defined as a number of people associated together by the fact of residents in the same locality, also known as quote unquote the common people. So, the same locality could be your nation, it could be your city, your town, it could be your household, it could be your block. It could be common religion, common ethnicity, common racial background. I mean, the community is pretty all encompassing. So let's go back to what is managerial epidemiology then? Managerial epidemiology is the study of disease and its prevalence in the community to aid in making sound business decisions. It is using the tools available in epidemiology to predict trends that can lead to absenteeism, to sound expansions of services provided, and through patient flow. And the picture you're looking at right there is actually one that I took over the summer. It's of my community. It's of downtown Stanton, Virginia, during our summertime weekend activities where they actually block off one of the main roads to allow us to dine on the streets and to come together, to talk to each other, to get to know each other. And that's our community. And epidemiology is looking at that, assessing that, seeing what's prevalent there, what we have in that community to make a sound determination. So, if that makes sense, and I apologize, there was a little interruption, so I did pause the video recording. We'll just continue back and keep on going from here. So that is what we're looking at. We're looking at those communities and what we can see in those communities to help predict trends that will allow us to expand our business, that will allow us to service our clientels, that will allow us to do anything. And really, to dig into it, it's going to really solidify what we do. So, how does it apply to you? You have to do what? Why? It's weird. You guys be staring at people? Come on, that's kind of odd. And yes, it is odd. But what we have to do. So, let's look at management. We've learned during the course of our time that management is broken down into 7 functions. They are planning, they're organizing, they're directing, staffing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting. And what is the planning is what is our objectives? How do we achieve it? Organizing is what tools do I have available for my success? Directing is how can I communicate that plan for success? Staffing is who's going to help me? Coordinating is how can I oversee this? How can I make this happen? Reporting is letting people know what you've done, celebrate your successes, let them know where your failures are so you can grow from it and learn. And it's amazing. And then budgeting is how do you afford all this? And they all blend together. There's no clear defined one ends, the other begins. They all are interconnected. They are all needed to function as a business, to function as managers. And epidemiology allows us to put more tools at play so that we can plan well. So plans are our ways of ensuring our success, to advance towards an objective without having one almost guarantees our failure. And some of us like to fly by the cuff, and that's great, but it doesn't always work. And having a plan when you know you're not going to have a plan that's going to work is a great thing. It allows you to plan for scenarios A, B, C, D, E. So, and then epidemiology allows us to see needs in our communities. It allows us to predict absenteeism due to seasonal illness trends. At the same time, it's allowing us to look at our patient surges so that we're not understaffed. And it's going to allow us to better plan. It's a tool that's necessary. And I keep saying that word tool, and it's needed. You're not going to build a house without a hammer. And that hammer's not going to do you any good without your nails. And if you have the nails but you don't have the hammer, that means you didn't have a plan to put the nails in the board. Or by the vice versa, if you have the hammer and the nails, you don't have the tools you need to build your house. And that's what we're doing, is we're building our houses. So managerial epidemiology allows us to use these trends and needs to ensure that our plans account for everything that we can foreseeably see. And it's not going to be perfect, and nothing's going to be perfect, and that's a wonderful thing. And that's just what it is. We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to know 120%. And it's just going to allow us to be able to put as much planning as we can, make sure that we have those hammers, we have those nails. We have screws and screwdrivers when we need to do something. We have a drill when that nail's not going in just right, so we can start that pilot. I mean, we're building our house, and we want to make sure that house is going to be sturdy and it's going to stand up when we're ready. And that's what managerial epidemiology is going to let us do. So what data do I need to look for? So there's two parts of data. There is the data, and then there's the source, and then we have to look at if the source is reputable, or is it just a well-spoken opinion on a topic. And honestly, Wikipedia is a great tool to give us an idea, but it's not a reputable source. I mean, yes, we could have somebody like Dr. Buffalo editing an article on Wikipedia, and we could have somebody like myself or one of my classmates editing something on topics that we know. But then we also can have that 7-year-old down the block that is editing those same articles and adding stuff that he read in Marvel Comics or saw on the Disney Channel in one of the cartoons. I mean, you don't know who's writing. So, and that's what we're going to really focus in right now, is what are good sources, what are bad sources, what do we need to look for, and just so what are good sources of data? Well, and that's a very good question, and that's something that we need to look at. We're going to need to know if it's a good source or if it's a bad source. We're going to need to know if it's a primary source or a secondary source or that tertiary source. That's somebody's opinion. So when we look at primary and secondary sources, so we're going to look at these primary and secondary sources. And what are they? And they're either real-time or they're dealing with past data. They're either surveys or observations and experiments or questionnaires that we conduct, or they're publications from government websites, government publications, published journal articles, and various books. Sorry about that. Something occurred in the background, so I wanted to get to the source of the noise so it didn't recur and detract from what I'm trying to explain to you all. So the other thing we need to look at, our primary sources are often expensive and they're not economical, whereas secondary sources might be a little bit cheaper to obtain, especially when dealing with the website. You just got to find that. You also have collection times, and primary sources often take longer to compile because we're doing surveys, we're doing studies, we're doing experiments, we're answering questionnaires, whereas secondary sources are very short. We're looking up a journal article, we're reading a chapter from a book, we're looking at a pamphlet from a government publication. And primary sources are always going to be specific to what we're looking at. We're conducting these surveys for what we want to know versus a secondary source that somebody conducted the survey on this topic that part of it fits with what we're researching, but part of it might not. So it's not going to be very specific. It might be right around that area. The primary sources are going to be very crude and not refined, and the secondary sources, they're going to be able to refine them down to a lot better detail. And primary sources are going to be very accurate to what we're looking for and very reliable because it's exactly what we need. whereas a secondary source might not be. I mean, they're going to be wonderful, but they might not be. So some of the things we're going to look at is we need to figure out what type of demographics we want. So what are we looking for? What do we want to find out? And just to begin with, there's three. I narrowed it down to three areas: demographics, histories, and trends. For demographics, we're going to be looking at somebody's race. We're going to be looking at their ethnicity, their age, their gender. Histories, we're going to look at medication and medical history. We're going to look at health history. We're going to look at vaccination history. Maybe even like when we're dealing with like chikungunya virus or something along that line, or malaria, we might be looking at where they've traveled to. Even Ebola, when that was big, was travel. Did they travel to these regions? Did they come in contact with this? What did they do? The other thing we're going to be looking for are trends. So like seasonal illnesses, such as influenza, occurs during very specific seasons for the most part. We're going to be looking at local epidemics. I mean, we think of epidemics as a disease, but it could be maybe this area, this community has a high percentage of college kids who engage in marijuana usage. Maybe we have this area that has a lot of methamphetamine users. So those are local epidemics that you might be looking for. We're going to be looking at ongoing pandemics. The one that we know about right now that's happening in 2020, 2021 is COVID-19. So that's an ongoing pandemic. HIV and AIDS have been an ongoing pandemic since the 1980s. We're going to look at vaccination percentages. How many people have, for example, let's go back to talk about the flu. With the flu vaccine, it's only going to be good if people get it. So what if people don't get it? What if they're not taking that flu vaccine? They're not using it. Well, how are you going to find that? You're going to look at how many people have been vaccinated. You're going to be looking at if your staffs were vaccinated and whatnot. So, I mean, another thing that let's go back to demographics. And one of the reasons we want to look at ethnicity and race. There's illnesses that show up in very specific demographics. Sickle cell anemia, sickle cell trait is one of those. So, I mean, you're not going to look for somebody to have sickle cell trait if their family origin isn't from around the Mediterranean, specifically that African community, but you actually will see it occasionally in populations like the Jewish population, because look back in their history, there's been some intermingling with that African genome a couple thousand years ago, so the traits will still show up. One we're going to talk about a little bit later is hemochromatosis. It's very popular in the Northern Europeans, but almost unheard of in Southern Europeans. And it's one of those things that we need to look at that. Age and gender. I mean, when you're dealing with gender, that's a very finicky topic. It's a very hard topic to discuss because nowadays you have people that are gender fluid, that are transgendered. And so do you ask them what their gender is, or do you ask them what their assigned gender when they were born is? And really, for what we need is what they were assigned at birth, not so much what they are now. And that's going to be a very hard topic to address with some of them, unless you know them and you have their trust. And that's going to be, like I said, very, very difficult. So let's go. How do we go about finding this data? We know about data now. How do we find it? We want to know what's going on. So we design a study and collect the data necessary needed to examine. So that'd be a survey, that'll be questioning out. Let's see, right here up on the screen right now. What type of studies are there? That's a very good question. And we're going to go through that very in-depthly. And we're going to start off with a basic study design. And right there's a couple of little quick things for you up on the screen. And basic study designs include cohort studies and case control studies and cross-sectional studies. And cohorts being an observational study where you're examining people who have a common attribute, such as they were born, like say, I'm going to date myself here, born in 1974. Maybe they live in Waynesboro, Virginia. Maybe they grew up on the South Shore of Long Island. and you follow them over time. And that being the main thing, you're following over time. It's not going to be time effective. It's going to take a long while to track these people, and it's going to be from the beginning of the study to the end of the study. So you're going to be working always going forward. But you're going to be able to look at several diseases because, hey, we'll pick on me because I'm here. If we looked at me when I was in my 20s, I was a healthy guy, didn't have any problems. Now let's say we conduct a 30-year study, and I'm 47 right now, so we can still begin the study with me. You're going to see somebody that has developed sleep apnea, who has asthma, who's developed cardiomyopathy, who's been recently diagnosed with ADHD, and this is all by looking at that one person. And you're going to be finding all these things, but the one thing you're not going to see is you're not going to be able to really study a rare disease because you're maybe catching it on the sidelines, but not as a primary thing. Now, a case control study, what is that? What is the case control study? So it's a study that starts with persons that have a health outcome. Like, hey, once again, pick on me. I have cardiomyopathy. That's a health outcome. Now, and maybe let's use somebody that doesn't have cardiomyopathy. We're going to look at them because they're the control. And we're going to go backwards. We're going to travel back, get into our Wayback Machine and go back and see if we can determine what caused it, what the exposure status was. And then we have a cross-sectional study, and that's an observational study, and the idea is to design in which all variables studied and observed at a sample point or during a brief period of time have occurred. And the cross-sectional study is going to be inexpensive. It's going to be quick to do. It's going to use representative samples. It's great for studying patterns of disease occurrence. You can look at multiple diseases, and it's going to be very useful for generating hypotheses. But there are downsides to everything. With the cross-sectional study, there's going to be bias because you're looking at the survivors. You're not going to be able to necessarily tell what the exposure was, and you may underrepresent some illnesses like the flu or the common cold. So, and now with the case control study, it's going to be inexpensive. It's going to be quick. It's going to be good for studying rare diseases. Let's go back to that hemochromatosis. It's going to be great for studying something like that. Several exposures may be evaluated, but it's going to be prone to selection and information bias. It's not going to allow a great estimation of risk. It's not good for studying multiple diseases or for rare exposures. Whereas it could be good for studying rare diseases, it might not be so good for studying that rare exposure. So, how do we find this data? So let's continue with this a little bit. So we have are also hybrid studies and incomplete study designs, and we're just going to touch very briefly on that because I don't want to keep you here all day. So, hybrid study designs, and we're really just going to focus on that because I'm not going to get into that incomplete study. Hybrid studies are going to be your case cohorts, which it's a little bit of a case study, a little bit of cohort study. They've come together, had happy little children that they've made their own case cohort study, and it's in cases we use. Controls are from a source population. Several diseases can be studied versus that case control study where we can't really do that as much, but it's going to be less number of cases versus a cohort study, but it's going to be more expensive than its case control study. So as you can see, there's some pros and cons, and they sort of all come together very intelligently. Then there's the nested case control, which is a hybrid design in which the controls are matched to the cases on the time of the case diagnosis. And let's zero in on that. There are chances that those controls can become a case. So you occasionally might have to realign things, and they're matched at the time of diagnosis. So, like I said, good and bad. Preferably, we want to keep with the regular, the basic designs. So, we're going to make a practice case, and we've said a lot. So, pardon me for a moment. I'm going to grab a drink of water because my throat is parched. So, All right, so now that we have the basics done, we're going to jump in with a practice case study. We're going to use our managerial epidemiology to assess for a new department or service, because I thought that would be fun to do. Because we're going to do a topic I'm very familiar with. So there's going to be a certain situation that occurred 3 years ago that I'm going to dive into with you all, because it's been something I've been kind of curious about. So, like I said, 3 years ago, Virginia Blood Services was the company I worked for, and we were acquired by the American Red Cross. And I had overseen one of our sites in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and pretty much my entire team was experts in therapeutic phlebotomy. We saw probably about 400 patients over the course of a year, and some of them came in every week, so we got to know them, we got to know their family and their kids. Others would come in maybe once a year, twice a year, and we knew them, but we didn't know them as well. But Virginia Blood Services really delved into this therapeutic phlebotomy program. They provided it for the community because they wanted to service the community. American Red Cross doesn't do that at the fixed sites. They do it on their mobile units, and it was a program that they hadn't really picked up until very recently. So in the past 3 years, the donors that we saw at our Harrisonburg fixed sites, the donors we saw at our Waynesboro fixed site, and the donors we saw in our Charlottesville fixed site have gone to other avenues to have their therapeutic phlebotomies done. And the hospitals, and I've spoken with a few of them, they've told me that their patient load increased significantly, that it puts a strain on. So our case is you're being hired by a company to assess the viability of a therapeutic phlebotomy program servicing the areas that were covered by Virginia Blood Services prior to their 2018 closure. The areas of operation would be Stanton-Waynesboro area, which is pretty much in the middle between Charlottesville and Harrisonburg, Charlottesville, Virginia, and Harrisonburg, Virginia, and those are about 30 miles away from Stanton-Waynesboro and about 60 miles away from each other. So it's a big chunk of distance. And there's approximately 150,000 people living in that area of about 360 square miles. The primary conditions that we would do a therapeutic phlebotomy on would be hereditary hemochromatosis and primary and secondary polycythemia. So, to give you a little background, obviously hereditary hemochromatosis is a genetic condition. It shows up in certain demographics and doesn't show up in others. Primary polycythemia is often due to environmental concerns, and it could be a precursor for some types of cancer. We'll go more into it a little bit in a moment. And secondary polycythemia is often due to medication therapies that one might be undergoing. So let's go on. So is a therapeutic phlebotomy prescription? What is that? Why do we do therapeutic phlebotomies? So we've mentioned two conditions already, and both of them are serious, and both of them require therapeutic phlebotomy to treat. The first is hereditary hemochromatosis, the second was that primary, and the third was that secondary polycythemia vera. So first we're going to look at hemochromatosis and its characteristics. Excuse me. So I would like to point out that while both are serious conditions, if they're untreated, they can increase one's possibility of having a stroke. In both cases, they do require therapeutic phlebotomies, and the blood needs to be drawn off to decrease the overall blood count in a person. So hemochromatosis is pretty much shows up in 1 to 300 non-Hispanic white people. More so we see it in men versus women just because the defining factors hematocrit and hemoglobin and ferritin levels, and guys, we hold on to our blood. Women come with built-in oil changes. They get rid of blood on a regular basis, so it does allow for a proxy therapeutic phlebotomy without having therapeutic phlebotomy, if you get what I'm saying. So the areas that hemochromatosis will often build up in is the heart, the liver, the pancreas, various glands, joints, as well as the skin becomes like, if you ever seen somebody that had that rusty reddish complexion and they were from Ireland or German descent, chances are that's what you were seeing. That's the color the skin becomes, like almost a bronzy. And it can lead to cirrhosis, it can lead to liver cancer, it can lead to heart problems, arthritis, diabetes, as well as a lot of the symptoms come across as flu-like. And the thing is, it's almost non-existent in Asian and Native American populations, and like maybe 0.01% likely in Hispanic and Black populations. The actual statistics you can look up right there, up on the screen. Now we also have polycythemia. So polycythemia, the red cells have changed. They've become more massive, or there are more of them, and either way, they're clogging up the works. Whereas hemochromatosis, it's that there's so much backup of iron. With polycythemia, it's pretty much clogging the arteries and the veins. So it's usually because of some type of stimuli. Secondary would be medical medication based, while primary is environmental based. People that work around diesel, that are around wood fires, and all that can be part of that condition. And comorbidities for both of them, or heart disease or strokes, because higher iron levels, less ability of blood to flow, can block up the veins and the arteries, which is one of the types of strokes. And then where hereditary hemochromatosis, we'll see more liver disease. Polycythemia, we'll see more lung disease. In all cases, they need to be drawn. This was something that Virginia Blood Services really, really did. And now, without them there's about 150,000 people that need this done. So what evidence do we need to collect? What do we need to know about these people? So let's see. Let's review. What do we know? We know the risk factors. We know hereditary hemochromatosis is non-Hispanic white males, or there's some prevalence in other races, and there's comorbidities of stroke, heart, and liver disease. We know polycythemia, environmental risk factors, diesel fumes, wood fires, living at higher altitudes, smokers. And there's a greater prevalence in men with no ethnic biases observed. There's predispositions for those on testosterone therapy or that have a history of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So are you ready? What do you think we need to collect? What information would make this work well? So let's see. We are looking at demographics. We're looking at, because we talked about altitude for polycythemia, we're going to look at the altitude. We're going to look at smoker and non-smoker because we talked about smoking with polycythemia. Race and ethnicity for our hemochromatosis patients. Gender originally listed on the birth certificates for both, because women will hide it better than others because they're naturally donating their blood. And then we're going to look at occupational and medical information. We're going to look at history of heart and lung disease because, well, we know they're comorbidities. We're going to look at a history of testosterone therapy for our polycythemia patient. We're going to look at history of stroke or liver disease once again, comorbidities. We're also going to look at occupations, specifically people that have been around diesel, carbon monoxide, and or wood-burning fires. And that this is all stuff that we can easily find either by doing surveys or pulling the information off of online. So we're going to break this down to 3 phases, because one is data that's easily available from the Census Bureau. That is something that we can get quick and easy. Race and ethnicity, occupation, and gender. Phase 2, we're going to need, if we were doing this for Augusta Health, we're going to be needing Augusta Health's electronic health history record data. Augusta Health happens to be the hospital that's here in Standard Waynesboro area. We're going to need their data. We're going to look at history of cardiac disease, history of pulmonary disease, history of stroke, history of liver disease, history of testosterone therapy, and then phase 3 would be patient and resident surveys, which we can conscript our physicians to help us with. They're going to look at history of smoking. We're going to look at the gender assigned at birth. So phase 1 is really going to focus on our hemochromatosis patients. Phase 2 is where we start adding in our polycythemia, primary and secondary. Phase 3 is when we're looking at everything. So for the purposes of today, we're going to pretty much strike out phase 2 and phase 3, because you know what? We're not going to worry about them today. We're going to focus just on our hereditary hemochromatosis patients. And the areas that we want to really focus on will be our race and ethnicity and our occupational. But those will be the easiest ones to get. But once again, we did say that occupation was polycythemia, so we're not going to worry about that one. And we're not going to worry so much about the gender identity, because hereditary hemochromatosis, the way they find it, is by chromosomal test. It is an excellent trait, so you have to have both genes present. Sorry, it's not an excellent trait. Back that up. You need to have both genes present. So women have more ability to not necessarily show that as readily, but it's one of those things that we don't really need to worry about the gender of the person for this. So we're just going to look at race and ethnicity. That's going to make this a lot easier, and we're just going to look at hereditary hemochromatosis for what we're going to do going forward. So data. So what do we have? What have we found out? We've done our research. Fancy computer noises here and there. Sorry, I can't do them too well. And what have we found out? What do we know now? So we know that our prevalence for each of them we've looked at earlier, that we are looking at primarily 980. Sorry about that, wrong thing. 900. Sorry, once again, let's try this third time. Third time's the charm. 984 people with a black and Hispanic population. I'm not sure if you can see the Hispanic over my face, but there is another 6 there, and Native Americans. I believe there was a few more there. There was 5 more there. So we're looking at potentially 999 people that could have this illness. So we're going to round it up to about 1,000. And our demographics say that our largest amounts will be coming from Albemarle County, which is a big area. That's where Charlottesville is in. Augusta County is where Stanton and Waynesboro reside, and Rockingham County is our Harrisonburg. So with these numbers, I've actually expanded our district to the surrounding area, because the cities are pretty much like pinholes, and we're looking at bigger ones. So we're looking at probably about 1,000 in the area that Virginia Blood Services used to service. And that's without factoring in our polycythemia cases. So what does that tell us? Where can we go from here? Let's see. That's a lot of data, you know? Oh my. So what factors do we have to consider? So we know what we're dealing with. We know that we're looking at 1,000 people. So things we need to look at. What are our expenses? We're going to be looking at about $170 per patient. That's going to be the cost of our blood bags. That's going to be our salary per hour for each phlebotomist. That's going to be and it's about a hour-long procedure, because between the time they walk in the door and you screen them, till you draw their blood, make sure they're fine, let them go home, rebook them for the next day, the next appointment, and then finish up your paperwork, it takes about an hour. Some people a little bit longer, some people a little bit quicker. An hour is a great way to look at that. And $17 an hour is the average salary for a phlebotomist according to salary.com, so we're just going to go with that. The reason I use the Terumo for my pricing for the blood bags, that's generally the industry standard. And after this blood is drawn, you can't use it, so you have to discard it. And that's about 2 pounds at $20 a pound, so about $40. So, sorry, it might be $190 patient. Sorry. Our revenue is going to be $323 per patient. So that's going to be, with my mistake, figure $130 per patient that we profit. Where do we go from here? What do we need to look at? So what do we do now? We assess our potential customer base for offering therapeutic phlebotomy. So that's for just our hereditary hemochromatosis patients, that's 1,000 potential patients. Then we address our cost for offering the services. That's about $170 a patient for 1,000 patients, or about $170 in cost, or $170 to $190, say. Then we address potential revenue, and then we subtract our costs from our revenue to see if it's profitable. If it's not profitable, there's no reason to go forward with it. But if it's profitable, there's reasons to go forward with it. So from offering these services, we're looking at anywhere between $130,000 and $150,000 to be generated from each of those donors if they only come in one time a year. Now, my history with therapeutic phlebotomies, the person that only comes in one time a year is very rare. These people are going to be coming in like once a month. So if we look at that and factor it by about another 12, we're dealing with a substantial revenue generation off of offering the service. So conclusions. What do you think we should do? You've seen the data. You've seen what the epidemiology has discerned for us. You've seen what the numbers say. So as managers, now we have to see if those numbers support us expanding our services. Is it a fiscally viable thing for us to do? So what I came to decide is, yes, this is definitely fiscally viable. If those donors even just come in once, we're making a good deal in profit just from offering it. And what happens is, then we can even look, if we add in polycythemia, primary, secondary polycythemia, the numbers only go up, but the costs will pretty much stay lateral. Will stay the same. So I mean, we're going to make the same amount of profit from each person that comes in the door as we expand it to other people that need therapeutic phlebotomy. So, and this is not just a one-time thing. They're not just going to come in once and bam, they're done. And then you never see them again. This is lifetime treatment. It's like taking your blood pressure medicine every day. You're going to need it for the rest of your life. You're not going to outgrow your need for it. You might space out your time a little bit more. You might only need to come in that once a year, twice a year. But at the beginning, you're going to be there like every 2 weeks. Some people see it every 2 weeks for the entirety of their lives. And that's a good amount of people that need it. So at this point, I'm going to leave the floor for any questions. And obviously this is a video, so I'm just going to pause for a moment, tap my papers a little bit, and pretend like somebody's asking me questions. Thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you for listening. It's been wonderful. Have a great day. These are my references so that you can see where everything came from. Thank you so much. Really, thank you so much for everything. And I really hope that you have a pleasant day and a pleasant evening, depending on when you listen to this. And once again, thank you. Bye.